Hey everyone, welcome to episode 0 of the Solving Problems podcast, where we help you use the power of story to reach more people and grow your church. Before we get going, let me introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Carone, and I'll be the host of the show. Like all the guests we have on here, I have experience working on staff at a church. I currently own my own business and work a lot with churches, and I'm a StoryBrand certified guide. If you want to know more about the podcast, you can go to solvingproblemspodcast.com. Or you can find me on Twitter at Jonathan_Carone, JONATHAN_Car1, CARONE. That's me on Twitter. So the goal for today's episode is pretty simple. First thing we want to do is introduce you to who we are and what you can expect on the podcast. We want to tell you a little bit about our approach and what makes us different from a lot of the other really great church marketing podcasts. And then we want to honestly convince you to subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss an episode. But I'm not going to sit here each week and talk to you by myself for 30 minutes. So I'm going to introduce you to the co-host of Solving Problems, Kyler Nixon. For those that don't know Kyler, he's a little bit of a child prodigy, I like to say, in the church comms world, because he's really only in his early 20s, but he's already got church experience on staff at a large multi-site church in Arizona. He has his own business as well, and in the past year, he's worked with something like 25, 26 nonprofits and churches. And you may know him from the Church Communications group on Facebook, because he's one of the admins there and helps run the Church Communications Premium group. I love working with him. I love his heart for the church, and we just have a whole lot of fun together. So Kyler's going to be on with us in some capacity every week. We'll interview him sometimes, and then if he's not the featured guest of the week, he'll be on at the end of the episode just to do some real practical tips to help you make some small changes and really connect with people. So let's go ahead and we'll bring Kyler in and we'll get into the meat of what we're talking about today. All right, awesome. Kyler's here with us now. Say hi to everybody, Kyler.
Hey guys, how's it going? Super excited to be here.
Awesome. Before we jump into more of the details on like who we are and everything, tell people why you're excited, why you wanted to be the number 2 on this thing, and like what this all means to you.
Well, I think the biggest thing is just equipping churches to better use story. I've seen it with my church clients and churches that I've gotten the opportunity to serve. And so I think just using the StoryBrand framework to implement story in these churches, I think is going to be really effective. And then also just wanted to crack jokes with Jonathan because I sometimes get bored. So that's the biggest reason I'm here and what I'm excited about.
And what you guys don't know is that me and Kyler are in a design group with like 12 or 14 other people. And somehow over the past year, it's been said that Kyler is my son and I'm his dad, to the point that before Creative Missions last year, I got a shirt made with Kyler's face on it that said, "This is my son who I am well pleased." And I was going to show up in the airport wearing that for the first time ever meeting Kyler, but I ended up having to back out of the trip. So,
well, Jonathan, if you remember too, I was actually in your Christmas card last year. So
that's right. You did Photoshop yourself into my Christmas card.
Yes.
So this is the type of like random junk that you guys had to expect. Anyways, back on topic. So one of the things that makes us different, and Kyler mentioned it, was that all the guests on the show, myself, Kyler, we've got Wes Gay coming up, Andrew Powell coming up this fall. All of us are StoryBrand certified guides. And one thing we want to make clear is this podcast isn't endorsed or affiliated by StoryBrand or Don Miller, even though Don is a genius and has taught us all a ton of things. But all of us filter our thoughts through the StoryBrand framework. We're all StoryBrand certified guides. And I'm going to let Kyler tell you what a guide is, because he's actually the one who got me on the StoryBrand train and helped me become a StoryBrand certified guide.
Yeah. So StoryBrand guides essentially are licensed through StoryBrand to execute the marketing framework that goes along with the StoryBrand messaging framework. So we're going to take a little bit of a dive into the messaging framework part of it a little bit. We'll kind of cover different aspects throughout the season, but guides really help execute the marketing materials and help organizations clarify their message using the framework. So we spent 4 days in Nashville with Don and his team. We're independent contractors contractors. We work for ourselves. We don't work for StoryBrand, but we went through 4 days with Don and the StoryBrand team, and they taught us how to use the framework, how to create effective marketing collateral, how to set up your website in a way that works. So that's what we as guides are going to be doing. And a lot of guides have different focuses. So myself and Jonathan tend to focus more on websites and different things like that, whereas Wes, who's going to be coming up in a little bit, focuses on copy. So you're going to get the knowledge of guides coming from a lot of different perspectives. And I think that's going to be a really, really cool part of this podcast.
And one of the things that, like, we keep mentioning StoryBrand, the StoryBrand framework. If you don't know what that is, go pick up Building a StoryBrand by Donald Miller. It's the same guy who wrote Blue Like Jazz, so you've probably already read some of his work at this point. But it'll lay out the framework for everything we're talking about. We're actually not going to dive deep into what StoryBrand is. We're going to kind of assume you know some of the stuff. We're also going to keep it high enough so that if you don't know what it is, that you're not going to be too confused. But go out and pick up Building a StoryBrand by Donald Miller. Read that. It'll take you a couple days, but it'll go ahead and that book alone will transform how your church does marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And
definitely
the reason I'm such a gigantic fan of StoryBrand for churches and using story for churches, because it's the same way that Jesus taught. Jesus taught using parables and stories all the time. And he would speak to the problems of the people that he was coming into encounter with before he turned their attention towards the Father. And so using story helps us do that and connect with ways. If it was good enough for Jesus, I think it's a good enough way for me.
For sure.
And then I'm not going to get super preachy on here because that's not why you're listening to us. But Jesus did say that he came to serve, not to be served. And using the StoryBrand framework actually forces us to serve the people we're trying to connect with. And it helps us put our focus on them and keep our focus on them. So for someone like me, who, as you get to know me, you'll learn this. I can be super all about me, super egotistical, super like, how can people serve me? How can I get a benefit from it? But StoryBrand actually forces us to think like, no, how are we going to serve people? How are we going to help them? How are we going to help solve their problems, which is the title of our podcast, Solving Problems, because we have to show people we care about them as people and that we don't just view them as heathens who are going to hell. When we do that, when we speak into their problems, they're more receptive to the gospel then, and they're just more likely to make a decision to follow Jesus.
For sure. And I think that's how it shifts to from why this specific framework is different than what a lot of churches in traditional marketing and communications have done in the past. The focus, and you'll hear this throughout the season, is that your church is not the hero of the story. And so a lot of times churches focus on come to our event, be a part of our ministry. And that's not how it should be. And that's not how Jesus taught. And that's not how he led. And so through this season, we're going to talk about how your visitor, your church member is the hero of the story, and how can we empower those heroes to win the day, and how can we take a guide position to help them win the day and help them be the hero of the story.
So that's basically what makes us different from other marketing, church marketing specifically podcasts. We're not going to get into the details of Facebook ads and Instagram ads and all these other things that there's a lot of great resources out there. We're going to focus mainly on messaging and how you can craft your messages, your services, your websites, and everything you do to connect with people on their level. But each week, as we go through this, we're going to focus more on implementation, not education. So like I mentioned earlier, if you don't have the Building a StoryBrand book, run out and buy that. I think last I checked, they had it on Kindle for like $2.99 or something. So you can get it super cheap if you want to pick that up. One of the things we're going to do as well, we're going to respect your time. We hope to keep each episode here about 30 minutes or so. Some will be less, some might be a little bit more, but we're going to spend about 20 minutes each week talking about one specific thing. For example, next week, we're going to talk about the single biggest problem that most churches have implementing story and StoryBrand into their church with Wes. But then we're going to close each week with a real practical tip that's me and Kyler are going to talk about just some simple things you can do that you can change like today to help you start reaching more people. Because once you start understanding this framework, it helps you filter your thoughts, and it's really not that hard to start implementing things right away.
Right. I'm excited. I think this is going to be really good. I think it's going to be helpful for a lot of churches. And like Jonathan was saying, I think we're going to give you a lot of practical, we can do this today, we can do this week type action steps. And so I think through this podcast, our hope is that you can have a clear message, you can reach more people, and you can really understand how people are thinking and how they communicate to one another and with your church.
One of the things we're going to do each week as well is we're going to be specifically honest with you. One of my biggest pet peeves with any type of advice type of podcast is when people are vague in their critique. And the irony is that I'm being vague in my critique right now. But we believe that if you're listening to this show, it's because you want to improve what you do. And for that to happen, you need specific examples of what's good and what isn't. I played sports growing up. My minor in college is actually coaching. And so one of the things that I know as a coach is that if I don't tell you exactly what you're doing wrong or show you examples of that, you're never going to get better. If I keep everything in the theoretical, you'll never know where to go and what specifically you need to do. So we're not going to make fun of other churches or belittle them, but we're going to point out some things we've seen on the internet, in some of the Facebook groups or whatever, that could be done just a little bit better. So one of the things that we do is Kyler and I both are active in a few of the church communications groups on Facebook, and we'll just spend time in those groups giving feedback as well. And we wanted to bring that type of feedback into one place that we could do, that we could just show people, hey, this is what you did. This is what you could have done that would have been just a little bit better. And the reality is, until you know things, you don't know what you don't know. And as I've done this, the more and more I've done it, the more I've realized I don't know what I don't know. And so we're just going to hopefully shine a light on some of those things that you may not have even thought about before, that once you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Let's do that.
Right. Right. My hope too is that you'd come in with an open mind. Just understand that this is, a lot of it is going to seem like common sense, and it is, but come in saying, hey, what can we improve on? Because we're going to be learning alongside you guys. We're learners, and we're trying to grow ourselves and grow in our communication skills. So as we go through this, and the guests that we have on, we're going to be learning with you. And so we just encourage you to come in, have an open mind, and really just be focused on, hey, what can we take away from this week, and how can we implement it and help grow our church?
So here's the awkward part where we actually ask you to subscribe to the podcast. And if you like us, go ahead and rate and review us as well, so that we can get the word out more. The reason we want you to do that is because we truly believe the StoryBrand principles can transform how your church reaches people. Because once you get your head around them, this isn't just marketing. This can become how your staff actually works with people. Kyler, you're actually working with a church right now who's implementing that staff-wide, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You'll realize this is not just applicable to marketing. That client that I'm working with has implemented it on their website and on their social media, but they're also implementing it staff-wide, giving their team common language that they can unite around. And then in a couple of weeks, we're about to plan out their Christmas services using the StoryBrand framework. So this is not just for church communications people or church marketers. This is for senior pastors. You can write your sermons with this. This is for church admins, executive pastors, really anyone who is involved in communicating anything to your church. This podcast is going to be helpful for you.
So here's what you can expect this season. We're really just doing 6 episodes this fall because of the timing. We know your Christmas season after Thanksgiving is insane. So we're not even going to try to compete with that. So starting next week, Wednesday, the 10th of October, we're going to put out 1 episode a week for the next 6 weeks. That'll get us up until Thanksgiving. And then we'll take Thanksgiving off through Christmas and be back in January with season 2. But here's what you can expect. Kyler's going to be with us every week. If he's not being the person being interviewed, he'll be with me towards the end of the episode to show you those quick tips that we talked about. But in episode 3, me and Kyler are going to talk about how to create a website that actually speaks to potential guests. He just launched a great one with that church he just mentioned, Ezra.church. If you want to go ahead and check out a website that looks story branded and kind of get an idea of where we're going to be going in episode 3. And then in episode 6, the week before Thanksgiving, we're going to talk about how to market your church to unchurched and dechurched people. How can you actually reach people who aren't in your walls and don't really care about what you're doing? But how can you provide value to those people? Next week in episode 1, Wes Gay is going to be with us. Wes has worked with a lot of people. He is one of the top, if not the top, StoryBrand certified guys, and he comes from the church world. He's worked with North Point Church in Atlanta, with Southeast Christian Church in Louisville, and with PushPay, the online giving software. So he's worked with a ton of people and is probably one of the best writers that I know.
For sure.
I love the way Wes thinks. But in episode 1, we're going to talk about how churches struggle with the idea of always making the visitor the center of the story, because we've always been taught Jesus is the center of the story. But just as a little tease, this podcast was almost called Jesus Ain't the Hero. But then I talked to some pastor friends and they told me there's no chance they would have listened to a podcast called Jesus Ain't the Hero. But in our marketing, we have to make sure we make people the hero of the story and not Jesus. And that's really hard for a lot of people who have been taught that Jesus is the center of the story all the way back since Sunday school. But next week, we're going to talk about how marketing is not discipleship and the difference between the two and how you can make that work for your church. And then Wes will be back with us again in November. We'll do an episode on how you can earn the benefit of the doubt with people. It'll be the precursor to Kyler's second episode. We're going to talk about how churches can show empathy to people before they even walk in the door, because we want people to know that we care about them and that we're for them, and not just that we think they're terrible people. So Wes will be with us for that. And then a couple more episodes that I'm really excited about. Drew Powell is the creative arts pastor at Cross Point Church in Nashville. He's also a certified guide with us. And in episode 2, he's going to be with us to talk about how to plan and communicate a great Christmas service using the StoryBrand framework. How do we do something that's not just let's sing a couple carols, light a candle, and then feel really good about ourselves? But how can we reach the people in our community? How can we inspire them to show up at Christmas and use that as a way that takes the gospel to them and hopefully invites them into a relationship with Jesus? And then in episode 4, we're going to talk with Drew again about how to communicate your events in a way that make people actually want to show up. Crosspoint does a really good job with that. And so one of the things that I'm really excited about Drew being a part of is he's on the ground every single day inside a church doing this. So doing what you do probably. So you'll have an advocate in him for how to do this. So that's what season 1 looks like. Kyler, what are you most excited about over the next 6 weeks?
I think all of these guests are going to be great. And I know Wes personally pretty well, and I haven't yet met Drew, but just seeing some of the things that he's put out and some of the stuff that he's done at Crosspoint, I think this is just going to be a really phenomenal podcast. I know I'm a little bit biased, but I think these guests that we have on are going to be really life-giving and are going to provide a lot of really helpful insights for churches. So I'm just excited to see where you guys, the audience, goes with this. I'm excited to see what you create, and hopefully we can help move the capital C Church forward by using story to help people grow their church and help churches solve problems.
So that's episode 0. Thanks for hanging out with us. Don't forget to subscribe. We should be on all of the major podcast platforms: iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, SoundCloud. If there's a platform that we're not on that you listen to podcasts on, just drop us a line on the website at solvingproblemspodcast.com, or you can reach out to me on Twitter at Jonathan_Carone. Carone is spelled Car1. So Jonathan_Car1. And I'll do whatever we can to get that up for you by next week so that you can subscribe and listen with us every week. Like we mentioned before, Wes Gay is going to be with us next week. We're going to be talking about the single biggest problem that most churches have when using story and the story framework to reach people in their marketing. And as a little teaser, the biggest thing that most churches struggle with is that when using story, Jesus is not the hero of the story in our marketing. We'll dive into that a little bit more, talk about how marketing and discipleship are actually two different things. And Wes is going to be with us. He's a great writer, great experience in the church with North Point, with Southeast Christian Church. And it's going to be a really, really fun episode for you. So make sure you subscribe before then. But we will be back next Wednesday, October the 10th, with episode 1. Hope you have a great week.